Hello and a very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us today. We are looking forward to this session. It's my great pleasure to be joined here today by two of my amazing colleagues, Ellie Trobe-Hogan and William Lynam. We're really looking forward to introducing you to our study on capacity building and to the board meeting, some thoughts from our side, our own opinions on the board, the GCF board meeting that took place in October. For over 24 years, our team has been supporting and guiding clients to achieve low carbon, climate resilient development. And we do this through catalyzing systemic transformation. As you saw on the little video that we had, it's a world sustainably transformed that we're working towards. And we really hope that the input that we provide today will be thought-provoking for you and help you in drilling into the challenges, the opportunities for mobilizing climate finance. Please do introduce yourself. I can see a whole lot of people that are doing that. Hello, Ignacia. Hello, Ayub, Mona, Juliana. Wonderful to see you here. And Nega from Ethiopia. Fantastic. You've joined. One of the projects approved from the board was from Ethiopia. It was fantastic to see that one. Well, great welcome to you all. So we're going to just dive quickly into the agenda. My colleague Ellie will be giving us insight into our recent GCF insight that is focused on individual capacity building and the capacity to access climate finance. And then we'll be unpacking some of the key issues related and emerging from the 40th board meeting of the GCF. Of course, this is within the context of the climate COP taking place right now in Baku. So there are quite a few people who wanted to join who wouldn't, but are going to get the replay kit. We will send out a video recording of this session and the discussions and answer any questions in that replay kit that we perhaps don't get round to today. So looking forward to all of that. And this COP is really called the Climate Finance COP. So we think it's really appropriate to be doing this in parallel because the GCF is the main instrument for the UNFCCC in delivery of climate finance and delivery towards the change that we're all seeking to achieve. So without further ado, I think we have some participation slides. Perhaps they're not there. Yes, so please do post your comments in the chat as we go. Ask your questions. There's a question tab. You can use the main chat, but it's even better if you put them on the question tab, then we can highlight them. Do upvote questions that are there. So put in thoughts as things go. It's really very welcome. We have a couple of polls, maybe just one poll where we're going to ask for your inputs. When that pops up, we'll let you know, and please do fill that in. So now it's time to introduce the rest of the panel. Well, my name is Ballard-Tremeer. I founded ECO, and I had the great privilege this time of going to the board meeting in Sondo in Korea. So the next person in our team is Ellie. Ellie is one of our specialists in climate finance project design. Specifically, Ellie has a lot of experience in SIDS, and she's got really strong background in marine and coastal sectors, including fisheries, aquaculture, and the blue economy. She's also an amazing facilitator, really helps to get people engaged within stakeholder consultations, and I'm sure you'll see as well as she makes her presentation later today as well. And William is a senior consultant in our team. He's one of our forestry gurus, climate finance, forest ecology, management, agriculture, really broad base of nature-based solutions with 15 years experience that William brings. And William is really involved in so many different projects. One of the projects that was approved at this board, William was doing some advisory work supporting it. I'll mention that there, but that's in connection with the UNCDF locale project. Great. I think without any further ado, I will hand over to Ellie to dive into our little publication, GCF Insight, focused on capacity building and capacity to access climate finance. Ellie, over to you.
Thanks, Grant. And yes, every quarter we dive into a different climate finance topic. And this quarter we are exploring the capacity to access climate finance. So here is our lovely publication that I'm sure lots of you have seen, and I think and I hope a number of you also responded to our various polls and a data gathering exercise that informed a lot of the results that are presented. If you happen to have not seen it, you can access it via our website. But we're here today to talk about some of the key findings and access to climate finance in general. So, why is this important? Why are we even bothering to discuss capacity? And particularly when we hear so often those targets of amounts of climate finance being pledged, and particularly right now, the ambitious targets of doubling our adaptation finance by next year. And there is a little bit of apprehension about how we actually do that and distribute that fund effectively and equitably to the most vulnerable communities. Not only have we got this ambition for 2025, but currently at COP, where already we have this spotlight on the new collective quantified goal on climate finance. So this new goal is seeking to rapidly accelerate and expand the amount of climate finance being pledged from the previous target of 100 billion to upward of, the needs of upward to 2.4 trillion. And I've even seen research to show that actually 6 billion is really needed for us to meet our adaptation needs. So it's one thing to have that money or to have that money pledged, even to have the money move somewhere, so it's mobilized, it's got some activity. But what we're really wanting is for that money to get down onto the ground and actually be invested in interventions and in ways that are going to build our climate resilient and future for those most vulnerable communities that are being most impacted. And we talked a lot about SIDS last time, about how the disproportionate impact of the effects of climate change are being felt by those that are most vulnerable and haven't even contributed to it in the first place. So we're focusing this quarter on the biggest barrier, sorry, that's biased, one of the biggest barriers to accessing climate finance, which is capacity. So let's start things off by you using your brain, and we're going to just release a poll in a second, asking what do you think are the biggest challenges of capacity building? And if you don't find one that you think is the biggest challenge, then you can write it in the chat. Or if you think that all of them are, you can also write that in the chat. So we'll give a couple of moments as you have a little think. Maybe you could even let us know in the chat, and maybe that could help spark discussion on the chat, or even stimulate some questions of, in your own organization, what is the issues of building capacity at the individual level, or even the institutional level. So we'll give you 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's release the results if that's possible. Okay, so we see that actually lack of institutional capacity, and institutional capacity is quite a broad topic, but Maybe again, this would be another good thing to stimulate some chat. What do you think of by lack of institutional capacity? Maybe it's, the amount of people within organizations that can generate that, the storing of the knowledge within the institutions themselves. And then we see number two, the lack of funding for capacity building. So this is a big one, right? We're talking about accessing climate finance, but how much of that finance needs to go to build the capacity to even access this and use it and mobilize it in the places that it's most needed. And then continuously changing, complex, fragmented landscape, number three. Okay, well, I'm not going to reveal what our survey said. I'm going to take us to think about the big picture and what we're trying to do when we're building capacity to access climate finance. And so, it is undeniable. There are numerous research pieces and reports out there that conclude that capacity is one of the biggest barriers to accessing and implementing climate finance projects for adaptation and mitigation. And this framework here is presented from the UNFCCC. And it's really a nice, I love visuals, and really I think here we see on the left-hand side the three layers of where capacity is needed. At the individual levels, we all here are individuals regardless of our institutional affiliation. And we, through our careers, we develop our understanding of topics, and we have to keep improving. And as systems change, as processes change, continually upskill and keep that knowledge current. And then institutionally within our organizations, we all have questions around how that knowledge is retained, how those individuals that are embedded within those organizations continually get trained and upskilled and retain the knowledge that's most relevant and up to date. And then finally, the systemic level. And this is the enabling environment of it all. This is what is fundamentally there, providing the finance or the frameworks and regulatory frameworks that we can operate through. And probably, this is my analysis, to be effective, we need to think about all levels. In our survey, we tried to focus predominantly on the individual level, but we found, and I wondered when we put it out, it's almost impossible to separate because they're interconnected. So we need more people, we need stronger institutional capacity, and we also need the systems that are going to support capacity building at each of those organizations that are involved in mobilizing climate finance and the individuals that are participating. And through, through this, nice idea, mapping, we're essentially trying to have the impact of addressing our challenges of climate change sustainably. So, in answer to the question that we posed at the beginning, all of those things that were written in the poll are the challenges, the biggest challenges. And yes, they're all, through the research and through the work that we did, they're all interrelated. We grouped those challenges into three main areas: knowledge and information access, cost, or the amount of money needed to build capacity, and then the institutional baseline capacity. And then the solutions, which are very boring because they're flip reverse of what the challenges are, is to increase the knowledge access, the funding, and also institutional strengthening. And through the study that we did, let's just dive into each of those in a little bit more detail. So knowledge and information access, what do we mean by this? The things that came back from our survey and from our own analysis are the fragmentation of funding sources and at least the perceived changing requirements to access finance and keeping up with the latest trends. So there's a number of ways that were suggested and that seem quite straightforward in order to address those. It's ways of mapping that climate finance landscape and having entry points for different types of organizations, and providing regular updates and establishing those information channels that are going to support individuals to continuously keep up with the latest trends. I mean, there are many channels, right? And I personally wonder if it's because there's so many channels and so many ways that we can get the information, which on one hand is needed, but on the other can sometimes be challenging. I'm also going to briefly mention later, it also is challenging because once training material is produced, it can go out of date. So anything that has been created and is being used then goes out of date, and it's perhaps not as relevant as it was when it was created. Accessibility of resources and information, producing, solutions to that include, producing simple guides in different languages, and the complexity as well in terms of that knowledge and information that can be accessed. So I've been thinking a lot about this myself, and I wonder if other people have, the templates that we use, if for any of those funds, templates that actually support, people to fill them out so that they don't need to pay eco to do it with them. Sorry, doing ourselves out of a service. But if those templates were created in a way that would actually support the completion of them, that could at least take the edge off. It could be a little bit one step towards leaning in. And then cost. I mean, the cost is kind of just very straightforward in that there needs to be more finance to capacity building. And I think also in project design, and when we're talking about the major funds, and how not being afraid to budget for the capacity building, and not just at the governmental level, like all levels, like down to the grassroots actors, because it takes the whole landscape to really address this climate crisis. So we can't just be always focusing at the governmental level. And also the length of time that we provide that finance for capacity building over the lifetime of the project as well, not just the development of the project idea. And then finally, institutional challenges. Yeah, one size does not fit all, and so we're trying to develop and make things work in one. There's one hole, a square hole, trying to put a round peg in a square hole. So sometimes we're trying to adjust how we create a project when it's it was designed in a different way for a different institutional capacity. And institutions themselves have limited people and perhaps limited budgets themselves, and so there can be high levels of turnover, changing of people. So how do organizations retain that and build training means that support? I would probably add one additional suggestion here that came in from one of the respondents. The institutional capacity can be supported, remember, by the systemic environment that it's in, and even having support structures from the funds to deliver that capacity building and hold that information within the organizations themselves. Okay, so what we did with this information is we created a GCF project, a theory of change. So here we see we're proposing that in order to address those challenges that were brought up, those of knowledge, finance, and institutional barriers, that we can work by, and actually I was thinking about this, that really are our knowledge barriers are like the individuals. Like we need to have the materials, the information in an accessible way, the templates that we can use that support the individuals. So there's an increased number of people working in this area, and there's the training that's available to keep everyone up to date. But then we need the institutions which then support those individuals with their increased knowledge by having those knowledge sharing means between other organizations within regions and even within the same sector globally. And then systemically, there needs to be more funding, and more funding specifically with the budgets, with allowances for the amount of capacity building that is needed at all at the individual and organization level within the countries to address the challenges. So if anyone wants to, I don't know, provide input to our theory of change, it's available in the report, and we'd be happy to talk about it further. And then finally, we also thought about GCF readiness, because obviously that the GCF readiness already provides support to build capacity prior to project implementation. And we had a lot of feedback on that from our survey. And people, people were challenged by training and knowledge sharing and implementation support in general. So in terms of training, there was discussions or comments around moving off. Again, it's this one size doesn't fit all, that different capacity provisions doesn't always work so well in other environments. For the knowledge sharing piece, there was lots of suggestions in terms of improving of ways to actually share information between organizations. So ways of streamlining as well, the way that we apply. And one of the most interesting ones I thought was establishing a dynamic platform for knowledge exchange and sharing for continuous knowledge learning and improvement. And then finally, institutional support. I think we've really spoken to that already, but providing bespoke, specific support through implementation as well, not just before implementation. But obviously, the GCF readiness has been updated, and Grant, I wonder if you've got a few insights from the GCF board on some of the key changes that our participants might be interested in.
Yeah, thanks, Ellie. Just some thoughts that were emerging from the board meeting. I'll go into more detail on other parts of the board meeting later. Round readiness is the new readiness strategy was approved about a year ago. It's for the 2024 to 2027 period. And it really does fall into three main areas of support that is delivered, including building both institutional and individual capacity. So that's one of the key intentions and deliverables from the readiness support strategy. I do recommend having a look at that strategy. It's easily available on the GCF website. Just to familiarize yourself with the different approaches. One interesting element there is the new opportunity with an interesting funding modality. You may know that ECO is one of the service providers for the PPF, the Project Preparation Facility, and GCF has just recently been retendering that. So we've all been bidding. I think there are many companies that have been bidding to provide that service, and we hope that we'll be successful with it, with our proposal and our bid. But now included in that is readiness support. What is interesting here is that it's not the individual NDA that needs to contract readiness or even a delivery partner, but GCF from a strong shortlist would issue a request for proposals for pre-approved companies, organizations to deliver that type of readiness support. Our experience with PPF service has been very positive indeed. We've been able to mobilize great projects. One of them was approved at this board meeting through that modality. And if you're in a position to look at the opportunity for delivering readiness through that modality, in other words, from the shortlist of organizations, companies, I do really urge you to give it serious consideration, because it can be efficient and effective. One thing that ECO always brings to the team in the projects that we do is very strong local participation and the best-in-class experience with delivering project preparation services or readiness, training, and such like. So there are these two modalities. Directly, NDAs can apply to the GCF for readiness, or they can do it through this type of readiness service modality. Consider both of those carefully, I think. That's all I wanted to say.
Thanks, Grant.
Perhaps people have questions there. Yeah, thank you, Ellie.
And I might just answer one of the questions before I just make two more slides. But Paolo in the questions asks what mechanisms could ensure knowledge sharing goes beyond information transfer, fostering meaningful partnerships and local ownerships and adaptive learning that supports long-term resilience and self-sufficiency in accessing and managing climate finance. So I think it's a great question. And we had some really great responses in our survey around the need to create spaces for grassroots actors such as CSOs and NGOs to learn and discuss. And it kind of pertains to the point I made earlier about we can't just build capacity in one area, because that may help a project be approved, but we actually want projects being led and being driven by those on the ground. So I don't think there's necessarily one answer, but it involves engagement with the full environment of stakeholders and creating those spaces, not just holding data in platforms where we can see learning reports. There's a really nice example. There's an organization we're working with in the Caribbean called Canary, and they do a lot of video learning as well. So it doesn't all have to be just report sheets. Things can be visual as well. But yeah, Grant, any other points on that?
No, that's good. I noticed that I put on a different question from Paula when you were answering it, upvoted it there, but in a way we've answered that as well in terms of the readiness program, PPF. How do you optimize it? Well, I think it's got to be systemic. I think there's got to be some sort of joined up thinking where you're seeing a bigger picture, not just that particular project on its own, but also we've had positive experiences with this PPF service contracted approach. I think that is pretty effective. I guess we would say that we're a service provider for it as well. I think it's a valid point.
Yeah. Acknowledging the biases.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So just to make a little pitch. We as ECO, we do offer a lot of capacity building services at both the individual and institutional level. There are a number of different ways. It's not just ECO doing this, but providing webinars and modules and online training contact or reports and guidance. But, this is still static, and it needs to be brought alive through action. And we heard that a lot from our survey respondents, that it's one thing to know the knowledge, it's very, very, very different to implement. And so there's a lot of need for learning through doing. And so what we also do is not just create the dry stuff, but we try and create a bit of the wet stuff. That sounds horrible, but in-person in-person connection and learning through engaging with other people, dialogue, discussions. So yes, we offer in-person training and online as well, using as many interactive tools as possible, whether it's some light-hearted connection games just to get people connected, or quizzes and interactive activities to learn key concepts. So that is it from me. Do we have time for a couple of questions, or will we move on to the board meeting?
We've got another 2 questions that are here. Maybe we've answered some of them. Florentia, I think you're asking around who would provide it. I don't think it's an either or. Ultimately, one has to build one's own capacity. What I mean by that is, I'm a very firm believer in that we each must take hold of what needs to be done and learn. That's really inside us, but also institutionally within an organization. ECO benefits from external capacity building training, but also from internal. But I think a number of people in the chat have commented around funding being a major issue. Fully understood, and we need to work out ways of giving access at affordable rates, also using things like GCF readiness to deliver that type of capacity building support in the countries, in most vulnerable countries, and in places where it's really needed.
Yeah, and just to add, I think we as consultants and the consulting industry in general, we've got a responsibility to leave more behind than, not just
Absolutely
do it. So that's our responsibility, not just to...
You joked about doing ourselves out of a job, but I think that would be the ultimate great result, that you don't need a foreign consultant coming in to manage, to bring together local experts and such like, but that it can be done internally.
Yeah, 100%.
And I don't know if we have time really. Hind is asking, do you need country or region specific knowledge? What do you think about that, Ellie?
I think there's a lot of benefit of regions building knowledge collectively. Working with regional organizations as well can be a really effective way of supporting capacity building, again, down to the grassroots level. In terms of country, region-specific knowledge, I think it's strengthening those knowledge sharing mechanisms, whether it's between countries of similar type or regions and geography.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's certainly knowledge around navigating local customs, approaches, organizations, how to mobilize people, how people see collective action, taking into account local people, indigenous people, understanding the culture and issues. Then there are some other things like, you're doing a lot of theories of change recently, Ellie, aren't you? And so I wasn't surprised to see the theory of change in our report as well, because it's a good model, but it's a good model to think through how we expect change to take place. So change, theory of change, that is a technique, an approach, a way of thinking. That's something that is perhaps not so regional. There are regional elements to the theory that you actually come up with, but the process, the mechanism for doing that, and that's what one of the things you need to be able to do in order to access climate finance, at least from the GCF and from any other funds. So there are practical tools that are perhaps not regional, and then there's other local knowledge that's critical.
Yeah.
All right. Well, fantastic. Thank you, Ellie. Really appreciate it. we've taken a little bit of extra time there. I'm going to now give you some insights into the board meeting. It was an exciting session. There's so much that came out of it. I'm not exactly sure how to pack it all in. Have you got a full screen view of the slides here? If someone could let me know, because it's showing a little bit oddly on my screen, to be honest. Yeah, it seems as though there was some thumbs up there. Fantastic. Thank you. It's small, I'm being told. Okay, so let me just stop sharing. Let me escape this and go back into it. And whoa. Okay, thank you, Microsoft. I don't need that. Excuse me for the access issues here. Wow, everything's popping up at once. All right. And how do I get rid of that thing? Okay, we're almost there. Apologies for the slight technical problem. I'm going to share the entire screen. All right. Oops, wrong button. Okay, hopefully this is better. All right. Got some thumbs up there as well. So thank you. So some quick observations. We are going to talk about GCF restructuring. I want to mention this because I had a lot of discussions at the board about restructuring, but it wasn't a topic of the board. You may know I think it's the 9th of September, GCF announced a restructuring. They put a new organogram on the table on the website. There was a lot that we needed to deal with. I'm going to talk briefly about that. I'm going to talk about accreditation framework. The first step to access the GCF is accreditation of some form or another. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the accreditation framework. I'm going to talk about RED Plus policy. In fact, I'm not going to, William is going to give some input on that. Then we're going to briefly dip into projects approved, and I'm going to say some words about private sector projects. I think there's some interesting observations from that. Okay, let's see. So firstly, the structure of the GCF. This is the organogram that went onto the website. And those of you working in design of projects, you may have experienced that the people that you've been working with are suddenly switching around. People are handing things over. We've been working on a project for quite some time in Uganda, and we're getting a handover process. I must say, really well handled by the GCF in that handover. But of course, when you hand over from one staff member to another, there can be these logistical issues. What is really key here is the Chief Investment Officer role and how that has changed. So I've got a little question to pose. I've written it down on the side of the screen over here. So those of you that know GCF well, the question is, where is the Division of Mitigation and Adaptation? Anyone know where that is? Where is the Division of Country Programming? So the Division of Mitigation and Adaptation, this group, is the one that was dealing with reviewing proposals, funding proposals, SAPs and such like. They were involved in that. So where have they gone? And then the next thing is the Division of Country Programming. This group was responsible for readiness. Where are they? They're not on the organizational chart. And for example, this is the Quality Assurance and Monitoring and Evaluation Group, QAM. Where is that? There's a monitoring and evaluation and learning, but in fact, that is slightly different function, as I'll try and explain. So that's a question there. So without keeping you in suspense, I don't know if anyone's typing up anything specifically on that. Let me jump on to digging into this Chief Investment Officer role. And there are 4 new directors. They are all brand new staff members at GCF, each with a responsibility. So Catherine Kaufman is coming on as the Director of the Africa region. Helmut Mandel is coming on as Director for Asia and Pacific region. Thomas Eriksson for Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and Middle East. And Kristen Lang for Latin America and Caribbean. So this is new positions. These people were not employed before. And in fact, they hadn't at the time of the board meeting all come on board, although some of them, I think Catherine, for example, was at the board meeting, but hasn't actually started. And we expect November, December, and these people to come on board. What is important here is that GCF is restructuring itself into these pillars. And the question, I asked, where is adaptation and mitigation? It's built in, but it's an evolving thing. It's built in within each of these. So if you take Africa, within the Africa region, you will expect to find each of those things. You'll expect to find people dealing with readiness. You'll expect to find people dealing with projects. And you'll expect to find people there dealing with, for example, quality assurance or the M&E side of things within each of the regions. And actually the regions are subdivided into sub-regions. So I know, for example, within Latin America and the Caribbean region, there are 3 divisions. And those divisions are geographical. I'm not 100% sure what the divisions are, but I imagine there is a Caribbean, there's probably Central America, and there's Latin America, South America, probably there. So that's part of it. And all of this comes under Henry Gonzalez, who we know well from GCF board meetings. So he's an existing staff member, and he manages this team. The private sector facility is here under his umbrella of his team. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say in terms of this restructuring. And it's quite interesting for those of us developing project proposals or interacting with the GCF. I think it's a good move, but there are really teething problems. And sometimes some of the questions I was asking, well, how will this be dealt with? They were saying, well, we have to still work that out. It's a real work in progress at the moment. All right. One of the big things at the board meeting that was discussed actually in the board meeting was around accreditation. There was a plan to revise the accreditation framework, and what the Secretariat put forward to the board was a policy to agree the principles. That was the idea, to present this to the board. What are the principles? Once the principles have agreed, then they can go down and work out what are the criteria, what is the process, what are all those details for delivery. Well, from the discussions, I'm tempted to say the only thing that the board members really agreed with was that the current accreditation process is not effective. Actually, in the words of many of the board members, not just not effective, but broken and needs to be fixed. So that was one of the main messages coming out from the board. But they really, it was mixed, different countries, different constituencies with different points of view. But there were a lot of questions, concerns around country ownership, because the Secretariat had put forward an idea that non-government organizations could self-nominate to become accredited. They were worried about requirements for passing on concessionality. There were discussions about whether GCF should be requiring organizations to show that they're on the path for Paris alignment. Really interesting with the COP underway, and divergent views on that. Some saying, no, that's not part of what GCF's role is. You're accrediting for delivery of projects. You're not accrediting for a transformation of the organization. And others saying that GCF is the instrument of the UNFCCC. It needs to deliver that. I was tempted to say that was the only thing they agreed on. They did agree that there needs to be transparency. They did agree that there needs to be process, but actually after many, many hours of discussion, it went away and came back with an idea that was finally agreed, completely different, that GCF needs to put forward the whole package before the board members can say whether they're happy with them or not. In my view, there's a little bit of a disagreement between process and principles. I was quite keen to see principles agreed first, then work out the process, but they want to see both the process and principles all together. Okay. Yes, that's going to be in B42 when the Secretariat comes back with those thoughts. And now, William, thanks for coming on board. Tell us a little bit about this exciting news where the board did agree.
Yes, thank you, Grant, and good morning, afternoon, or evening to all of you who are joining us, depending on where you join us from. Yes, this was B40 was an exciting board meeting with regards to forests, and specifically to REDD+, as the GCF sort of adopted a new policy on REDD+ results-based payments. Since I know you're not necessarily all forest people, just as a little bit of a overview, REDD+ is an initiative aiming at reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, while also fostering sort of conservation and sustainable management of forests. And obviously, because forests play a crucial role in storing carbon, and also with all sorts of co-benefits like biodiversity. So in REDD+, countries receive sort of financial incentives based on verified reductions in emissions related to corresponding reductions in forest loss. And these incentives are basically the results-based payments, or RBPs, which were sort of the core of the new GCF policy that was adopted in B40. And this builds on a number of other GCF sort of initiatives. There was a pilot program launched in 2017, so it sort of builds on the successes of that. And then there were in B35, so there was a mandate for REDD+, so it sort of includes aspects of that mandate, including maintaining and improving upon scorecards. So that's, if anybody looks at the new policy, it's one of the annexes of the policy. And it basically sort of is a way of quantifying how well REDD+ is sort of planned for and structured in a country. So that's, the mandate also requires recent baselines. So FRLs are the forest reference levels or forest reference emission levels. Because in order to say that you're reducing deforestation, you have to say how you're going to measure that and to sort of establish your baselines. You have to sort of say how you define a forest, how you're going to measure all that. So that's what the FRELs are for. And yeah, in order to get results-based payments for REDD+, you have to have a sort of recent baseline within the past 5 or 10 years. And then regular assessments and possible periodic revisions. So this was sort of brought up in the discussions after the presentation of the new policy. Some people wanted to make sure that the price of carbon could be revised. And others also wanted to make sure that the way Indigenous people's rights could also be revised if it seems that their rights are being infringed upon. And then,
William, on that particular point, the regular assessments, GCF's response wasn't it that the policy itself doesn't include things like the price, but it's the decision that is made by the board that does. So they will regularly make a new decision that will establish new price. Is that
right? Yes.
Essentially that difference, right?
And then,
shall I jump on to the next slide? Just pushing you forward.
Yeah. Sorry, maybe I'm taking a bit. So
like normal with our specialists, they were very happy to talk all day about everything. So how are they mainstreaming it, William?
So, I mean, basically, instead of having a separate window of funding specific to REDD+ or anything like that, it's REDD+ payments are going to be part of the regular GCF project cycle. So that will sort of allow more countries to access funding. It will sort of increase transparency a bit. And it will mean that, all of GCF standard procedures will apply to these results-based payments. The funding for REDD+ will have to go into the allocations, the regular allocations. So there will have to be a geographic balance. There'll have to be the same sort of, the GCF will still have to have a kind of 50-50 mitigation adaptation balance and etc. But yes, the REDD+ results-based payments won't be a standalone thing. It'll be mainstreamed into the regular procedures of the GCF. Some of the main takeaways from the board meeting are that there are a number of countries that are ready to launch, roughly 12 or more, and then more than double that are, I think there was something like 26, 27 or something that they say are close to launch. But those countries need to, again, there has to be, part of the policy is that there's a maximum gap of 5 years between the results period and the forest reference emission level determination. So some countries just need to sort of update that before they would be eligible to or ready to launch. Again, since this is being mainstreamed, countries can use GCF readiness to help do that, to establish or update their FREL. For this funding period for 2024 to 2027, the price has been established at $8 per ton of CO2. And each country will have a cap of 15 megatons. So that's roughly $100 million cap, essentially, for results-based payments. And so now that the policy has been approved, the GCF is in the middle of developing templates and guidance documents for REDD+ results-based payments.
Thank you very much, William. Yeah, there was big celebration. They approved this on the first day. I think they wanted it as a good win. It had been put forward at a previous board meeting and shot down, and then they went back and consulted. And I think the result is really fantastic. Thank you very much, William.
Sure.
Appreciate that. Apologies for losing the connection there. Missed some of the exciting things I was saying about project preparation. I thought I would record a quick video of what I intended to say during that part of the presentation. Let's see how it goes. Hopefully you'll find it useful. I was going to talk about funding proposals, and I started off by highlighting some of the main elements of board meeting 40 of funding proposals. There were 16 proposals approved. 2 of them had to be voted on, but 16 funding proposals with just over $1 billion of GCF funding going to support them. There are 5 direct access entity proposals and 11 from international ones. There was a first DAE proposal from an organization in Pakistan. And what I wanted to highlight is this one around the first PSAA. This is project-specific accreditation and project in Burundi. So I'm going to go into a little bit of detail about that. And it's important to note that 8 of these projects are adaptation only, which I think is a very good sign that half the portfolio, not in the amount of funding, but half in terms of the number, are that sort of project. So this is an overview of all the projects that were approved at the board meeting. I'll highlight a few of them. There were actually 4 of them that ECO was involved in at different stages. And the first one of those is here, the SAP 44. It's a project around empowering women groups to build resilience to climate impacts in the southwest of Angola. And it was developed by the team at ECO under the PPF service modality, where we supported the accredited entity OSS. To do pretty much everything from the once the concept note was approved and the PPF service took place up until the project was approved. It's a small SAP project, but a very interesting one nonetheless. The next one that we supported in some way was the Save the Children project here. On climate resilient health and well-being for rural communities in southern Malawi. We didn't have a very significant involvement in this. We were hired to help with the economic and financial assessment for that project, and we developed the models, both the economic and the financial models for the project. The next one is the BOAD project, the Local Plus project in West Africa. For some of the countries named there, we supported BOAD and UNCDF to address comments from the GCF and from the ITAP. So that was our role there, supporting them with that process. And then finally, we had a very interesting small role in the Indonesian project with GIZ. And that is that we were hired by GGI to deliver some training and some capacity building, which included in Indonesia, which included face-to-face training in a big group for 2 days worth of intensive training on how to develop concept notes. And one of the concept notes that was developed and supported during those sessions was this actual project. At that time, there was not GIZ involved, and we provided the training and ongoing coaching and a contract to GGI. And this project was finally approved at the last board meeting in October. So those are 4 that ECO had some small involvement in at this particular board. Now, I think what is interesting, if we sort of dig down, I wanted to talk a little bit about this PSAA project. This is the project-specific accreditation. So it says here PSA applicant. It's not an accredited entity. This is the 1 Acre Fund. The 1 Acre Fund has not accessed, has not gone through accreditation with the GCF, but it developed and put together this project. The interesting, I'll give you a few elements of it. The interesting element about the PSAA was the Secretariat's assessment, and you can see that in the document that went to the board. This is just a screenshot of the summary for the assessment, and you can see that there is 4 main issues that are raised within the assessment that is carried out. Firstly, an overall capacity score they give, the fiduciary functions that they are being project-specific accredited for, that they will be allowed to deliver in this particular project. This is the basic fiduciary and a specialized fiduciary standard for project management. Noticeable that they don't have on-granting or a tool like that, and you'll see that that affected the project design that we'll come to in a moment. And then there is a maximum environmental and social risk category that they're assessed to, which is for category C projects. That's the most benign project that is there. In this assessment, the Secretariat didn't come up with any conditions around that assessment. So that was the accreditation assessment. It's a long document. that goes into detail on each of these elements. But this is the summary. I thought it's interesting. I hadn't seen one before. I guess most people haven't, unless you're working on a project like this. We've got some, but they're at early stages, and we haven't got to this level yet. So that's the PSAA element of it. Here is the theory of change. And it's a project essentially that provides, through a type of revolving fund, awareness raising first, and then provision and delivery of inputs or products, and then recovery of the input to repurchase for the next season. What is interesting here is the mechanism by which they are doing it. It's a type of revolving fund, but you saw that their accreditation is basic fiduciary and project management. This is the way that the project is envisaged to work. So firstly, there's training delivered, then there is program enrollment, and an order is put forward by the farmers in the season. So they're looking at a growing season. They make orders for product, seed, and fertilizer, which the executing entity then buys. They themselves then supply it to the farmers, who, well, the suppliers deliver it to 1AF, and then 1AF delivers it to the farmers, as you can see over here. The farmers receive the products. Then the farmers, when they've got the cash flow available, reimburse the value to 1AF, and that gets put back into a fund. So it's quite interesting that GCF doesn't see this as a mechanism that requires lending, and I guess that's because 1AF is actually buying the products, delivering it, and then they get a reimbursement for the cost of what was done, and that goes back into the fund, which is used in order to buy more seed. So it's a type of revolving fund. Interesting perspective on it. And then I just wanted to say some last words related to private sector projects. So private sector projects were mentioned by board members, and of course there were private sector projects approved. I can show you which ones were marked as private sector projects. These are the Climate Ventures project from this new DAE. It's the first project that is submitted around private ecosystem for climate action in Pakistan. And then the three projects at the bottom of the list, one from Acumen. These are all international organizations. Acumen Resilient Agriculture Fund, it's the second phase of that, the Greening Financial Systems, and the IFC project. What I wanted to mention in terms of the challenges and the discussions that I heard around private sector projects is that a lot of board members are very skeptical about multi-country private sector projects. And you can see we've had a number of them approved. Well, there were comments on each one of those around, do the countries really benefit from these projects, and why should NDAs sign off on projects when they don't actually see any benefit? There were quite a number of members that put that forward. The other issue raised from some board members was around the identification, or I guess creation of a fund that has not yet identified the projects that will be funded. And that, of course, is the way that most funds work, that a bank fund work. And I put in my notes at some stage, these board members don't really seem to understand how that banking mechanism works. They do understand it, sure, but they wanted reassurance, and there is a general skepticism, of course shared, well, not of course, but it is shared by the civil society organizations, who always raise objections to private sector projects, as far as I can see, because they are worried that the funds don't actually get used, firstly, to support adaptation or mitigation actions, so that they don't actually deliver what they say they're going to deliver for the planet, for the climate, for the local people. And secondly, about how those decisions are made and whether you can trust those decisions, so that the money goes to vulnerable people who really need it. And I guess the third element that is there, it's not just in this project, in the Burundi project that I mentioned earlier, for smallholders, there was some concern by board members that this funding is going to be is a form of funding which is just the in a way a revolving fund lending to farmers who are vulnerable and don't have money and don't have a flow of money. And so that's one of those challenges, because you are giving funds and the people who then have to pay back or take a loan, whatever it is, are vulnerable and don't have funding. So why are we using this mechanism to support these vulnerable people, and especially in Burundi, for example, and with Ackerman's projects, Côte d'Ivoire? So these are somewhat a little bit more wealthy countries. The BOAD project, which is around let me just see where it is here, this local project. The BOAD project, it's a public sector project, but there is an element of private sector support within the project, which also had these questions. So briefly, these are some of the concerns. Multi-country projects, can we trust the private sector? And will the funds actually flow to the countries? So if you're considering putting forward a project that is private sector ones, I would really suggest trying to, it may not be very easy, but put forward this reasoning very clearly, ensure that the consultation takes place in depth, and ensure that there is strong support from the NDA with really good understanding of how this project will benefit people. And of course, it must benefit people. Just make sure that you're doing what needs to be done to ensure that this will be delivered. All right. Well, that's it for this little extra addendum. I hope you found it very useful. Please feel free to get in touch with me, get in touch with William, and if you'd like to ask more, or with anyone in our wonderful team here at ECO. Thank you very much.